Hello everyone, my name is Mitch Gardner, and today I am delighted to be joined by Chad Cannon, who's worked on some Hollywood films with Alexandre Desplat, Conrad Pope and Howard Shore on films such as The Secret Life of Pets, the new Fast and Furious films, Hobbs and Shaw, Secret Life of Pets 1 and 2 and Godzilla. Chad's also recently done American Factory, which is done by Higher Ground, Barack and Michelle Obama's new production company, and we'll be talking to him about that in a short while. So Chad, thanks a lot for joining me today.
Nice to be here with you.
No worries. What I would like to do is just start off with your childhood, if that's okay. So when did you first start getting involved in music, and what was it that attracted you to it?
Nothing attracted me to music at first. My mother was a very strict enforcer of practice hours in our house. I'm the youngest of 6 kids, and she had all 6 of us playing an instrument by the time we were at the ripe old age of 4 or 5. And I really didn't enjoy it until I was 12. I would have much preferred to be playing Nintendo during those years of my life.
Yeah.
But at some point, I was part of a violin ensemble that was invited to perform in Chicago, which was like, coming from Utah, going to Chicago was like so exotic, and that was the big city. That was the first time I'd ever been to like a big urban city with skyscrapers, and I recognized that music is what had taken me there. So
Yeah.
that changed my incentives away from Nintendo to working, harder on my violin skills, my piano skills, and I started a rock band in high school. I got really into songwriting, which then led me into learning more about music theory and taking proper, classical music composition lessons
Yeah.
in university. So
Cool. So going on from that, then becoming onto media composition, was there a score, or a film, or a composer that enlightened you into in the world of media composition?
for me, it was definitely Howard Shore,
Right.
because I was a super fan of Lord of the Rings. I had made a spoof series called Lord of the Rams in my high school years. The ram was our school mascot, so we made
Right.
this really dumb high school imitation of Lord of the Rings
Yeah.
based in the rivalry between us and our other rival high schools. And we scored the whole thing with Howard's score, of course.
Yeah.
So that was the first time I really dove into any film score, and his melodies and harmonies and orchestrations were right there in my ear from the get-go. So that was at that point I realized, oh, you can become a film composer for a living, and so I decided to do that.
So you moved away. That's cool. That's cool. So as well as media composition, then from what you do now, you also do concert works. You've got a work called The Dreams of a Sleeping World, which is an hour-long symphony that has a solo woodwind and a choir. So I believe it's based upon 10 paintings by Oscar Iowa. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And this was a piece that was commissioned by the Barlow Endowment for Composition at Brigham Young University, which is a Christian school in Utah, that has an endowment for composers. So I applied with Mate Bekovac, who's Slovenia's best-known clarinetist,
Right.
and so essentially he is the one who got the premiere performance by the Slovenia Philharmonic in 2017.
Right.
And then that went over well at that performance. Well, there were 2 performances, and then I decided I wanted to record it, so we got some money together and recorded with the Hollywood Studio Symphony, which is it's not really an official orchestra, but that's the go-to name for the orchestra players that do all these film scores. So
Yeah.
if you Google Hollywood Studio Symphony, you'll see scores by a lot of the big Hollywood film composers.
Okay.
But
Cool.
those are a lot of the same players that played on this Dreams of a Sleeping World recording.
Cool. And what was it like to work with them on that?
Oh, they're incredible. It's they're so used to coming in and playing sight reading John Williams, and he's conducting. In fact, the day we recorded this, the players that same morning had just come from a John Williams session.
Oh, amazing.
And they came over to East West Studios where we did this recording. And that it was cool. They're just fantastic players, and it's a privilege to get to work with people at that level.
I can imagine. It's a lot of people's dreams, so that's always good to hear. And then just going on from that, you've got a new concert works called Sky Vision that's being premiered later this year, and that was inspired by Christopher Michel. Was that he's got some images of Antarctica?
Yeah, and he's an incredible travel photographer or adventure photographer. You should check out his photos. They're really, really awesome. Such epic views into our world onto the planet Earth, because he goes everywhere on planet Earth. And beyond. He just did a series from a U-2 spy plane where he went up above the atmosphere and took photos. And
amazing.
So he's really a cool guy. The Nuremberg Symphony is currently music directed by my friend Kachun Wong, who's a Singaporean conductor that I've worked with in the past.
Yeah.
And he asked me to write a new piece for their 2019-2020 concert season. So I'll be in Nuremberg for the concert on September 21st. And that piece is it's 10 minutes long. It's just a concert opener. It's like it's a fun adventure piece, essentially.
Wow, it sounds good. Hopefully I get to hear it at some point, and good luck with that one.
Thank you.
So just moving on from that one now, just move on to the moving image side. As I mentioned, you've worked with Conrad Pope, you've worked with Howard Shore, and then you've worked with Tyler Bates on some great films, Guardians of the Galaxy, Secret Life of Pets, Godzilla. What was it like to work with these composers? It's such experience and knowledge in a field like this.
Yeah, so when I've worked for these composers, what it really was so Conrad Pope is like LA's best known orchestrator, and he's also a fantastic composer.
Yeah.
He's worked with John Williams for many years. And he was the one who first hired me on to the Hobbit trilogy as an additional orchestrator and as a proofreader on his scores, to make sure that there are no mistakes.
Yeah.
And that was like it was baptism by fire. It was like it was 3 months of insane amounts of music, because it was 3 hours of music for these films. For even just one of the films is almost 3 hours of music, I think.
Yeah.
And of course it was a Howard Shore score, which to me was like, he was the cream of the crop, and to get to work on that score was like such a wild ride and so cool. And I'm so grateful to Conrad for mentoring me. And it's the same situation with Desplat, where it's Conrad's gig, and he's bringing me on as part of his team to help make sure we meet the deadlines and get these crazy amounts of work done in short amounts of time. So
were the deadlines always quite short for them? Were they always, or were you always given a bit of leeway at all with any, or were they just generally quite quick?
You mean the job, like the projects themselves?
Yeah, so we a lot of in and out.
Well, The Hobbit was a little longer because they had booked. Peter Jackson was in New Zealand with Conrad, because Conrad conducted these scores.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And Howard was in New York writing the music, and then we had our team in LA, working on the scores. Yeah. And that film was, of course, so huge, and we had a lot of time with the orchestra, which is unusual. Mm-hmm. I think they booked like a whole month with the New Zealand Symphony.
Wow.
Orchestra, and it was just like, you never get that much time with an orchestra. So that was unusual. Usually it's more like, like on the Desplat films with Secret Life of Pets, it's like, okay, we have 2 full weeks to prepare the scores. The sessions are 3 days or 4 days at Warner Brothers in 3 weeks from now, so we got to get it all done by then, and that's the cutoff.
Yeah.
So there's no time to mess around. So usually it's much more condensed, and that's why that's why these composers need orchestrators, because they themselves aren't going to have time to prepare 1,200 pages of orchestral score.
No, of course not.
In 2 weeks, and that's also why Conrad ends up bringing on a few people to help him manage the workload, because it's just so concentrated.
Yeah, I can imagine with that. But I mean, how many of you were there overall? So there was you, and there was Conrad.
Yeah, there's a couple people that have worked with Conrad for a long time. One's this guy named Bill Newland, another guy named Clifford Tasner, then both of those guys are very experienced and very. They taught me a lot about, working with first of all the differences between classical music writing and film writing, and then also the differences in how you express things on the page in entertainment versus how you would express it in a concert work.
Right.
There are some key differences, and they helped me get versed in all of that lingo and nomenclature and all that.
Wow, I bet that was great to hear from people like that with such experience.
Yeah, I mean, I would not have been able to create like American Factory or Dreams of a Sleeping World had I not absorbed a lot of orchestral knowledge from these guys. So
it's good that you can sort of develop it in future scores as well then. So obviously if American Factory happened 5 years ago, for example, you would never have had the shot.
Yeah, I would not have been in a position to score that film.
Yeah.
I've grown a lot as an artist and as a writer. And,
yeah, definitely.
And it's all thanks to these guys who were willing to mentor me and bring me up through their ranks. The one composer that I do work directly with is Joe Hisaishi. And he hired me starting about 3 years ago to work on his film music concerts.
Yeah.
Where he had me in charge of creating the suites for his film music concerts, which have toured worldwide and they're always sold out. And his orchestral palette is so rich and varied, and he's just a master of creating completely unforgettable melodies that just stick with you forever. And all of Asia practically knows his music. He has a lot of fans abroad as well, but particularly in China and Japan, he's like a household name, or at least his melodies are household.
Yeah.
Everybody knows them.
So when it comes to working on those like live in concert films, are you given a score from Joe, and then you sort of have to put it in, with the time codes and things like that? Or are you given?
Yeah, luckily for the big world tour, which is an hour-and-a-half show, it's called Joe Hisaishi Symphonic Concert: Music from the Studio Ghibli Films of Hayao Miyazaki. It's like this huge long title.
Yeah.
And that is a set show where we actually didn't need to put in time code at all, because they edited the films to. Like, it's not really a film music concert where you're like watching the whole film and the concert or the orchestra sitting there playing the score. It's more these are suites with the highlights from all these films, and then you see little highlights. It's like a highlight reel essentially. So syncing with picture was relatively easy. He just like hits go, and then the engineer presses play, and it approximately matches what they wanted. He's done a couple longer concert suites for his annual World Dream Orchestra tour, which takes place in Asia every August.
Yeah.
And for the last 3 years, he's had me do big suites of. This year it was Kiki's Delivery Service. Last year it was Spirited Away. And the year before it was Castle in the Sky. And each of these is like a 30-minute concert work. Wow. So what he does is he sends me all his old handwritten scores. I mean, Kiki's Delivery Service was a 1989 film.
Yeah.
So some of the softwares we use now didn't even exist then.
Yeah, of course.
So he just sent me his handwritten sketches, and there were spots where he just sent me the audio and said, "Oh, sorry, we have to do a takedown because we don't have any. There's nothing. I don't have any of the original scores with me anymore. Who knows where they are?"
Wow, that would have been.
So in that case, it was like really reconstructing just from ear, and also he likes it when I do new things. He's like, he gets mad at me if it's too much like the original. Sometimes he's like, no, this needs to be a fresh piece now. It's 30 years later. We should do something different. So he encourages me to try new things out, and then he gives me feedback both based on just looking at the score, and also after each concert he'll send me a message saying, oh hey, this was working really well, this is something we reworked. He gives me updates, and that's
cool.
been a really valuable mentor relationship as well.
Yeah, I can imagine that as well. So if we just move on now from concert works and symphonic suites to media composition. So if we first talk about Paper Lanterns, now this was directed by Barry Friquet. It was about a Hiroshima survivor, isn't it? And then the prisoners of war who were killed by the atomic bomb in 1945. Now, I've heard your music on your website for that, and it's stunning, I have to say. And
thank you.
I know that you were nominated for International Film Music Critics Award nomination for Best Original Score. And what was that like to receive a nomination like that?
Well, it was completely unexpected because that film was rather small. It was really cool that the film music critics kind of went for a score that was hardly anyone had seen, I mean, we did screen this film a lot in Japan. It's had, I think, several hundred screenings in Japan, as well as at, 20 or 30 festivals around the US and the UK. And Barry has spent a lot of money and time traveling with that film to promote it. And not because Barry was trying to make money. In fact, I'm sure he lost money on that film, but because he really believed in the power of that film as like a promoter of world peace. And it actually was. I mean, President Obama's visit to Hiroshima in 2016 was in part a result of this film being made because... well, and he also was... he recognized our guy. The guy in the film is Shigeaki Mori, who's the guy who published all these books about... the 12 American POWs who had died. And he himself was an A-bomb survivor, and he lost a lot of relatives in the bomb. And he still has weird health effects that he's sure are due to the exposure to radiation. But he was able to look past that, and he saw the American prisoners of war as just as much victims as he was. And he wanted to build bridges, and he did an incredible job with that. And for me, that film was that was the first film score where I really was at the helm of the music team, and I was responsible for producing the score as well as writing it. And that's one of the things I've learned, is that being a film composer is you're a film music producer. You're not just a composer. You have to be able to create a world-class recording in addition to just writing good music, right? So but Paper Lanterns was my first big opportunity of really putting that hat on, and it was a film that meant a lot to me because I've lived in Japan. I had been to Hiroshima several times before working on this film, and of course, since working on this film, I've been back many times to. Mr. Mori is a good friend of mine now, and I've done concerts in Hiroshima that he spoke at, and so on. But the film that's a film where I really put my whole heart and soul into it because it was something that meant a lot to me, and it was the first time I felt like, oh, I have a voice as a film composer.
So with that in mind. Just going on to American Factory. So you said about having to be a music producer. I saw that you were one of the orchestrators on that as well. So could you tell us more about the process with American Factory? So obviously you wrote the music, and then I saw you credited as an orchestrator. Were you given a brief for this? Was there already a cut that you wrote to, or was it just a bit of both?
Well, I worked directly with Julia and Steve, the directors, to create a musical language that was going to work for the film. The focus on woodwinds was a request from Julia, who had heard a Mozart woodwind serenade recently, and she really loved that it didn't have strings. And she thought it would work well in the film to have a woodwind focus, which was nice because the woodwind ensemble is a good contrast to all the factory noise in the film. And so each scene, you do something as a composer called a spotting session, where you sit down with the directors or director, and
Yep.
and you go through each scene and decide, okay, music in here, music out there. What's the music doing? What's its function?
Yep.
What colors do you want? You get like a checklist for each scene, and then you go and write. And some things you write get tossed out. Some things you write really nail it. I think every film composer goes through this, where sometimes there's a cue that just isn't working, and it takes a lot of different approaches to finally get everybody on the same page and everybody happy with the result. And Julie and Steve, to their credit, were very intuitive in their musical responses.
Yeah.
Some directors really don't know how to express, or they just don't even really care about the music all that much.
Yeah.
They just need something to go there, But Julie and Steve really have an intuition about what my musical language was expressing and how it should express it differently. And so they were really a joy to work with. And then as far as process goes, once a cue is approved, like once a scene is approved, then I've been creating what's called a mock-up, where we have these big orchestral sample libraries where we create a fake orchestra rendition of what it will be, and then you have to go through the process of actually notating that, and then you put it on a page in front of musicians and they play it, right? So that process is the orchestration process, where it goes from the MIDI representation to the actual notes on a page. Yeah. So it's a good deal of just transcription work, but then it also becomes orchestrating when you're having to make choices about, well, how many cellos are playing on that low C, and how many flutes are going to double on this melody, or so on. Yeah. There's a lot of choices that have to be made. And, on a film like American Factory, we did not have months and months to do this. We had, it was 3 weeks between when I got the locked picture and when we had to deliver final mixes. So we had such a tight turnaround time. That's why I got my friends to come help me orchestrate the thing, so that we can get it out the gates as we agreed to in the contract.
How many minutes of music was there overall?
I think ultimately it was like 55 or something. I think I wrote a lot more than that, and then they slowly cut back on what actually goes into the film, which is standard. That's normal. I usually write about double what ends up in the movie.
Wow.
So
better to be safe than sorry, though.
Yeah, and it's also an exercise in picking the best that you did. Yeah. It's like you don't want to send things that are incomplete or incoherent musical ideas. You have to let, just like any idea, it takes time to form, and it sits in the back of your mind for a while before it's ready to be realized. And good thinking requires time and processing.
Yeah. Well,
so
that's great.
A big part of my creative process is actually stepping away from my writing table and doing exercise and being out in nature and sleeping, because you need that time for your brain to really process what's working and what's an immature idea that you should get rid of. You can't make all those decisions in one sitting.
No, totally understand. Well, that's great. It's great insight. Thank you for that, Chad. Just one final question then, as we wrap this up. It's just for the budding composers, arrangers, orchestrators out there. If you have any bits of wisdom for anyone that wants to break into the industry, what would that be?
I get asked this question a lot, I think, which is weird because I'm still brand new to the industry. I guess not brand new. I've been working for 6 years now, so I guess that's not that new.
No,
but, yeah. Compared to John Williams, I'm a baby. The thing that I'm learning is that for people who really want to succeed as film composers, the number one thing you need to do first is become an artist. You really have to have an identity as a musician, and you have to figure out what you want to be saying as a musician.
Yeah.
So if you don't have any, you need to have rich life experiences for one thing, like be educated in a variety of things so that you can converse with the filmmakers who are always engaging with subjects beyond their expertise.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, for Julia and Steve, they're only experts in labor and workers because they've spent their whole lives, learning and working. They're filmmakers primarily,
Yeah.
so that's their expertise, but they're making movies about different subjects all the time, and they have to learn about them. So you have to be able to hold a coherent conversation with people about a variety of topics. So for me, getting an education, and that doesn't just mean a music degree, it means reading a lot of newspapers and having experiences abroad and just learning about the world. That's like such a key thing. And then second to that, or at least as important as that, is this commitment to your craft. So really spending the hours and learning and using your craft and sharpening that tool set so that you can really create what you're meant to create.
Yeah.
Those things are the most important. And then secondary to all that is like, okay, well, you need to have good people skills and you need to be a good manager. And like a lot of film scoring is data management. Like, they send me 10 revisions, and if I lose track of one of them, then that's grounds to get fired, or like they'll get mad, So you got to like be organized and have like, that's something very basic and applies to almost any industry, but it somehow gets lost on a lot of composers that you need management skills. And just like having a vision for what you want your music to do and want it to say. And, that I loved Howard Shore, but I knew all along I was not going to become Howard Shore because that's already been done. He had his glory days with Peter Jackson, and that was his thing. Yeah. So when I'm creating my thing, of course it's in his shadow, but it's like I'm a different person with a different life experience, and my music should reflect my own life experience, right?
Yeah, super. It's a great insight. Thank you very much, Chad. I think we'll wrap it up there then. I'll just say bye then. So American Factory is out now on Netflix, so please be sure to give it a watch. Music is by Chad Cannon, and it's great. You should just watch it.